Okay, so there is no doubt in my mind that whatever you think I'm going to say about Idrila the Beauty, it's not enough, and you're not ready. This is the video where I officially lose my mind, so strap yourself in tight, because here is the culmination of weeks of research and months of idle contemplation on the question, what the heck even is the beauty? And why did Hoyo pick this, of all things, as a whole eon that clearly has an important role in the story based on the way Argenti just keeps showing up literally everywhere we go? While researching, I found so many things to talk about that I actually had a very hard time thinking of how to even start this video, because just about anything in my list of notes feels like the equivalent of shoving you straight into the depths of the ocean, and I do prefer formatting my videos in a way that, hopefully makes actual sense to a general audience. I had fun reading the comments last time we did this, so I'd love it if you write your thoughts on what the beauty is before watching the video, and then you can edit it later to add your new thoughts based on what I said afterwards. To the lore nerds and the Argenti lovers, this one's for you. Chapter 1, The Knight in Shining Armour. Alright, starting with the easiest topic. Though little is actually known about the Path of Beauty so far, the clearest reference is that to fairy tales and the chivalric romances. I mean, chivalric romance is quite literally the name of Argenti's trailer, so it really doesn't get any clearer than that. For those that aren't familiar, this is a genre of literature that was popular among the noble courts of medieval Europe. The stories are centered around a chivalric wandering knight, known as a knight-errant, that goes on heroic quests, usually invoking the name of a lady before performing their noble feats.
Do not worry, you will hear my shout. Idrila the Beauty is the most peerless beauty of them all.
You might be familiar with this genre if you've ever heard of the legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, or the epics of Charlemagne, for example. In fact, Arthurian legends are directly referenced in both Honkai Impact 3rd and in Honkai Star Rail. A really popular trope is the heroic knight that rescues the distressed noble lady from the clutches of a terrible beast, usually a dragon. This trope is thoroughly explored by Disney, who took much of their inspiration from these medieval literatures. The story of Sleeping Beauty is actually directly referenced in a side quest, though in-game they call her Cinderella, a reference to a different Disney princess. The story of the princess that pricks her finger on a spinning wheel is actually about Aurora, the Sleeping Beauty, which was initially inspired by the chivalric romance called Persephorest, which was then adapted into Sun, Moon and Talia, which then became the Little Briar Rose, printed by the Grimm brothers, who were, of course, a primary reference of Disney's. In the Disney version, the princess is cursed to prick her finger and fall into a deep sleep, and her curse can only be broken by true love's kiss, delivered in the form of the heroic Red Knight, who passes the rose thorns, slays the evil dragon that holds her hostage, and rescues her from her slumber. Like most of these stories, the knight weds the princess, and they live happily ever after. The motive of a sleeping princess is, to me at least, extremely suspicious, especially when it extends even to the likes of characters like Brunhilde, who deeply inspire the Valkyries of Honkai Impact 3rd, as well as a central character in the Nibelungenlied, which is actually directly referenced many times in Genshin Impact, and the recurring themes of sleep with the finality, the entire premise of Penacony, the mysterious sleeping woman mentioned in Golden Gears, and the unknown location of Idrila. But anyway, another recurring theme is that of the magic mirror. Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? The driving antagonistic force of this plot is the vain evil queen and her magic mirror with the power to identify who is the fairest lady in all the lands. This is, of course, none other than Snow White, who has skin white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. This plot too ends with the evil queen cursing the beautiful princess into a deep sleep, who is awoken by true love's kiss delivered by the prince dressed in a red cape. Likewise, the magic mirror makes another appearance in Beauty and the Beast, where this time a handsome prince is cursed to appear like a hideous beast, a reflection of his mistreatment of the witch, his ugly inner self manifested.
Well, you shouldn't have been in the West Wing!
Well, you should learn to control your temper.
And he must break the curse by finding redemption in true love, despite his hideous appearance, before the last petal of the enchanted rose falls. This magic mirror reveals what the user wishes to see and is utilized often in the story. This magic mirror concept is very important to Idrila, because, well, they're supposed to be a magic mirror themselves. There's a faction of the beauty called the Mirror Holders who believe that Idrila was shattered into many mirror fragments, and if only they can collect all the pieces and bring them together, they'll be able to restore their missing Eon. The mirror holders refer to this mirror as the Mirror of Transcendence, featured in both the simulated universe occurrence and the Eon memory bubble. In their words, the reflection shows you beauty in its purest form in your own perception, and that is what Idrila is. Magic mirror on the wall. So what actually is beauty? Chapter 2. Tiferet. Beauty is inherently subjective, at least in my opinion and the opinion of many around the globe. However, there have been extensive attempts to define beauty, and one of the more popular ways is through mathematics and symmetry. It starts with things like the golden ratio, believed to be the definition of natural aesthetics, and ends with those funny charts that outline what the ideal human facial proportions should be. As interesting as these are, there's a specific interpretation of this idea that's quite relevant to us, and it can be found inside the Kabbalah. Returning viewers are likely familiar with this, at least in passing, but let me catch everyone up to speed, because context is quite important. Kabbalah originated as a form of Jewish mysticism, first appearing in Spain and southern France in the 12th century. It refers to the teachings of the books that were written after the 5 books of the Hebrew Torah, notably the Bahir, the Zohar, Etz Haim, and more. See, the idea is that all of creation forms the different facets of the infinite God, so the tree is a map that both outlines all of the aspects of God, but also aspects of everything that has ever existed, including humans. For Kabbalists, reality is composed of a series of these trees stacked within each other, the building blocks of all creation. Later on, the Tree of Life is adopted by some Western esoteric Christians and called the Kabbalah with a C, and also by Hermeticists, followers of Hermes Trismegistus, the namesake of Mona's teacher, Babeloth Trismegistus, with her first name likely being a variant of Babelo, the first Gnostic eon to be emanated from the infinite God. It's pretty easy to see how the concept of the infinite God and the Tree of Life overlaps with the imaginary element, especially with the way that the in-game eons draw on the imaginary for their power, just like how Gnostic eons draw on the infinite God for their power. Anyway, the Hermetic Kabbalah gives rise to Kabbalah spelt with a Q. For the purposes of Hoyoverse law, the Hermetic Kabbalah Tree of Life system is the most applicable. To break the tree down further, it is split into 3 main pillars. Left is the pillar of severity, right is the pillar of mercy, and in the middle is the pillar of balance, also known as the pillar of equilibrium that balances the 2 opposing sides. The bottom of the tree is Malkuth, which depicts the basic reality, and the very top is the closest to the infinite God, Keter the crown. You'll often also see this zigzagging path depicting Keter as number 1 and Malkuth as number 10. This is the path of the flaming sword, based on the flaming sword in the Garden of Eden that kicked out Adam and Eve, and the path it takes is the order in which the 10 Sephirot, the 10 emanations of God, are created. Above Keter is the Ein Sof the limitless light, encompassed by Ein Sof, the limitless God themselves, and beyond Ein Sof is simply Ein, the nothingness. Speaking of, this is a good time to introduce the Klapath, which is the shell or husk that surrounds the Sephiroth, preventing them from emanating infinitely, but also protecting these spheres of creation from the outer evil, the outer nothingness. Obviously, this is the namesake of the Eon Klapath, who creates barriers that surround and protect planets from the leviathans of the Abyssal Sea. Now, you may have noticed already in the middle here is a Sephiroth called Tiferet, representing beauty. This is an extremely important Sephiroth in particular because it is the central Sephiroth that has a path connecting to each of the other Sephiroth, except Malkuth. Dayat is not usually included as part of the Sephiroth for reasons, so Tiferet actually passes through Dayat and connects all the way up to Keter. Tiferet is considered the balancing factor of each of the Sephiroth, especially Gebra, the severity, and Chesed, the mercy, both of which are individually prone to extremes, such as the cold justice of severity becoming violence, or the love of mercy becoming sexual assault, both of which are considered evil and may manifest without proper balancing through Tiferet. The reason that Tiferet is called the beauty is because beauty manifests when you take 2 components, especially 2 components that are individually negative, and combine those 2 components into a new creation that in itself is very good, and exists in a state that is greater than the sum of the whole. Beauty is found in the balancing of opposites, the divine symmetry, the force that connects the aspects of creation together and unifies them all as something more. A common example of this is actually salt. composed of 1 part sodium and 1 part chlorine, the components of salt are individually toxic to humans, but combined together, they create something integral to our survival. And this is where Tiferet begins to become associated with alchemy and the pursuit of the spiritual and literal philosopher's stone, or the Holy Grail. And this is where the video is going to start getting really crazy. But before I move on, I want to add that, yeah, you might be thinking Tiferet sounds a lot like they could be Who, the Equilibrium, but that path goes way more into mathematics, the division of things, and altering fate to create equal karma, which is actually sort of the opposite of Tiferet, where Equilibrium divides whole objects into equal smaller parts on a grand scale. Tiferet is all about combining those smaller parts together to create something more beautiful than they ever could have been individually. In a way, I've started viewing these two paths as potential opposites. This might make more sense as we continue, so let's move on. Chapter 3. The Rosy Cross. Remember what I said about the Hermetic Bala used by the followers of Hermes Trismegistus? Well, now is the time to explore Hermeticism in more detail. Trust me, understanding this religion is very important for decoding Holyverse. Hermes Trismegistus, aka the thrice great Hermes, was a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, who were actually first recognized as equivalent deities by the Greek Empire in Egypt approximately 2,000 years ago. The focus of Hermeticism was on rationalizing various religious practices in pursuit of the truth, which continued on in the more modern era where it absorbed ideologies such as the Kabbalah from the Jewish mystics and even the Tao from Taoism to create what they believed to be a more complete, systematic truth of the universe. I guess the philosophy is that the truth of humanity must lie in the overlaps between cultures and religions, a philosophy shared in the ideas like Carl Jung's collective unconscious. It's because of Hermeticism that Holyverse is able to seemingly so easily splice together so many different cultural elements smoothly. Most of the work has already been done for them. Using this as a skeleton gives rise to a smooth system where angels, yin-yang, Jewish mysticism, tarot, demonology, and Egyptian mythology can all coexist seamlessly. Thanks, Hermeticism. Now, before I dive deeper into the more specific practices of the Hermetic Kabbalists, let me make it perfectly clear that this sort of thing is intended to be confusing by design. A lot of these occultists believe that true knowledge came from personal interpretation and a lifetime of study and experimentation, so don't expect to understand everything right away. I'll try my best to keep things simple, but these practices are considered esoteric knowledge for good reason. During the Middle Age and the Renaissance period, the writing of Hermes Trismegistus, known as the Hermetica, was strongly favoured by alchemists, who believed Hermes Trismegistus to have written them around the same time that Moses authored the Torah. In this context, he became strongly associated with astrology, alchemy, and magical subjects as the Renaissance alchemists studied the Hermetica. When the truth of the authorship of the Hermetica as a Greek creation was revealed in 1614, the Renaissance Hermetic movement drastically lost popularity. Approximately at the same time, the rise of the Rosy Cross occurs with the publication of 3 main manifestos: Fama Fraternitatis, Confession Fraternitatis, and The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. Christian Rosenkreutz is their supposed founder from 300 years prior, but he seems to be entirely made up, and his name kind of gives away what they were doing. Christ of the Rose Cross. This organization appears to have been a vaguely Christian-themed continuance of the Hermetic movement that survived the Renaissance. Did you know there's even a direct reference to the Rosicrucians with Holyverse's other rose-themed knight, Noelle, quite literally having the official Rosy Cross logo on her shield? Bet you probably didn't notice them sneak that one in. Her title is even the Chivalric Blossom. It really was here all along. Rosaria is the exact same too, by the way. Anyway, continuing, in 1887, a coded text, known as the Cipher Manuscripts, was decoded by a Freemason named William Wynne Westcott. He'd recovered this text from the belongings of a deceased Freemason. The manuscripts turned out to be a course of instruction in the Hermetic Kabbalah and Hermetic magic, including astrology, tarot, geomancy, and alchemy, but it also contained the address of a woman named Anna Sprengel, to whom Westcott personally wrote. This woman turned out to be a German adept of the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross, and with her permission, Westcott and his Freemason partners launched the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in their first temple, known as the Isis Urania Temple in London. Now, before I continue, I want to add that the choice of name here is extremely curious. Obviously, the Hermeticists were taking a lot of inspiration from both Greek and Egyptian religion and combining them into one deity. Isis was very important to them, and they considered her to be the mother of Horus, who in actual Egyptian mythology was sometimes Heather instead, but for the Greeks who were doing the combining, they simply considered both of these deities to be the equivalent of the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite. Additionally, one of the titles of Aphrodite was Aphrodite Urania, meaning Heavenly Aphrodite. So, with that context in mind, the first temple of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, inspired by the preserved teachings of the Order of the Golden Rosy Cross that they named the Isis Urania, is effectively a temple dedicated to the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite. Okay, as shocking as that is, you're probably wondering why would they pick Aphrodite of all things? Well, one of the foundational texts of the Rosicrucians is a book called The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. This story on the surface seems pretty normal, but is actually full of alchemy-related secrets, especially regarding the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. Now, the wedding itself takes place in the Tower of Olympus, and Christian Rosenkreuz actually stumbles across the sepulchre of Venus, who is the Roman Aphrodite, and in there he witnesses her naked corpse. Beside her is a tablet that reads, "When the fruit of my tree shall be quite melted down, then I shall awake and be the mother of a king. Because of this, he must later stay in the tower as the gatekeeper." So, for the Rosy Cross followers, Aphrodite actually represents a very vital aspect of their beliefs. I'm not done either. Not only does Argenti's weapon bear remarkable resemblance to the symbol of the Rosicrucian order, as well as the general church themes in his ultimate, just like Noel, Rosaria, and potentially even Rita, but my friend Stella and I were doing some investigating into Idrila's name. See, Idrila's name always bothered me because Hoyovas never names anything for no reason, and especially not something as important as the name of an eon. Naturally, we concluded this must be another case of the English translations team's accidental mistranslations. See, Idrila doesn't really mean anything, but when we break down the Chinese Idrila and translate it back into the English ourselves, Stella stumbled across the real name Idalia. Unironically, thanks to the popularity of Hurricane Idalia that showed up when she googled Idalia. At first this didn't mean much, but if you look into it, Idalia is actually a variant of the city in Cyprus named Idalion that was dedicated to Aphrodite, and the name Idalia is considered Aphrodite's nickname. So yeah, I think Idrila's name was actually supposed to be Idalia, and it's all a tribute to the Hermetic figure of Isis Urania, their version of Isis Aphrodite. With this in mind, it should come as no surprise that the Hermeticists consider the symbol of the Rosy Cross to be attributed to Tiferet, which is the Sephiroth of beauty in the Kabbalah Tree of Life. Chapter 4. Alist Crowley. Yeah, this guy deserves a whole chapter of his own. You've probably heard of him before. There are many pop culture references to him because producers love naming their demons after him. He's known as potentially the most famous occultist of all time, even eventually founding his own religion as a self-identified prophet. And he was potentially a British spy during the First World War. He also apparently invented the peace sign as a magical cure to Hitler's swastika. The more you know. Yeah, the dude was kind of a big deal, but let's roll it back a bit and go from the beginning. Alist Crowley was born into an evangelical Christian household and had a strained relationship with his mother, with her even going so far as to refer to him as the Beast, referencing, well, the Antichrist. Apparently he enjoyed this nickname, and this beast thing became a sort of recurring theme for him. As he grew up, he became increasingly skeptical of Christianity and would point out biblical inconsistencies to his religious teachers, and so he took to a life against the Christian morality. He began university studying moral science, then English literature, and he was so engaged with chess that he became the club president and seriously considered a career as a professional chess player. He also loved literature, poetry, and mountaineering. It was in college that Crowley had his first mystical experience. supposedly following his first same-sex sexual experience. Crowley was very bisexual and very sexually active, and he eventually even started a relationship with the male president of the school drama club, even referring to himself as his wife, but this was the beginning of his extreme interest in Western esotericism, and his boyfriend didn't share his interests, leading to their breakup, a lifelong regret of Crowley's. Crowley then headed to Russia to pursue a career in diplomacy, but a brief illness led him to contemplate his own mortality and the futility of all human endeavour. It was then that he chose to seriously pursue his interest in the occult. A few months after concluding his time at university, Crowley made connections that eventually led him to the 10-year-old cult society of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. He moved in with the senior member, Alan Bennett, who became his personal magical tutor, and together they performed magical rituals. Soon after, Bennett left to study Buddhism in South Asia, leaving Crowley to progress through the ranks on his own. Unfortunately for him, within the order he was quite unpopular because he was bisexual and he had a quite unrestrained personality. By this time, the Golden Dawn also had a branch in Paris, and tensions were rising between the Parisian and English sects. Crowley left the English branch, siding with the Paris branch, and they decided to try and take over the English branch, which became a whole situation. Eventually, it all ended up in court where it was ruled in favour of the English branch. After being isolated from the Golden Dawn, Crowley began travelling the world and engaged in multiple romantic and sexual affairs with assorted women, including one that was married, until he eventually reunited with his former roommate and magical tutor, Bennett, who was immersed in the study of Shaivism in Asia. After some time together, Bennett decided to become a Buddhist monk, and so they, formed an adventure team and travelled around, immersed in Hindu and Buddhist culture. A few years into his travels, he goes to Paris, where his friend's sister, Rose Edith Kelly, was being forced into an arranged marriage. So Crowley did what any good friend would do in that situation. He married her himself. Fortunately, on their honeymoon, Crowley actually did fall in love with her and resolved to prove it and win her over. Part of their honeymoon involved a trip to Cairo where they began studying Islamic mysticism. During this time, Rose would become delirious and tell him that they are waiting for you. And they, she would later explain, was the Egyptian god Horus. She then took him to a museum and showed him an artifact. The artifact number was 666, the number of the beast, tying back to Crowley's nickname bestowed on him by his mother. A few weeks later, Crowley hears a disembodied voice called Iwas, the messenger of Horus, and Crowley wrote down everything this voice said into his famous book titled The Book of the Law. According to Iwas, the world was entering a new eon of which Crowley was the prophet, but it wasn't easy for him because the book demanded he do things he did not want to do, such as stealing the artifact, fortifying his own island, and translating the book into every language. In his own resentment of the book, he decided to ignore it. After their honeymoon adventures, Rose and Crowley have their first child, Lilith. Crowley continues to publish poetry, climb mountains, tour, use drugs, and practice magic. Eventually, Crowley goes to Shanghai and meets a friend, reigniting his interest in the Book of Law, and they begin attempting to contact Iwas. His magic experimentation and use of drugs results in a second encounter with Iwas, resulting in the writing of 2 more texts that go on to form the basis of his upcoming new religion. He and his friends decide to form a new occult order that would succeed the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, borrowing a lot of their rites and rituals, but basing it more towards his new religion, which he called Thelema. Yeah, that new character in Honkai Impact 3rd is quite literally named after Crowley's personal religion. Better yet, a core part of this religion was his Scarlet Women that were considered incarnations of Babylon and Wives of Chaos, and their whole thing was performing sex-based magic with him. Anyway, you'll never believe what his order was called. AA or something? Okay, truthfully, the real name of this order was a secret kept between Crowley and his recruits, but it's widely believed to have been Argentium Astrum, Silver Star. Yeah, I really can't make this up. I'm pretty sure this is the reason that they named Argenti that. It's simply too much of a coincidence otherwise, right? Not only that, but his order continues to use the symbolism of the Rosy Cross inherited from the Golden Dawn. And so Crowley's magical life continues, but for the purposes of this video, I'll be ending his life story here and moving on to Chapter 5, Alchemy. So now that you guys have the most basic foundational knowledge and are familiar with the meanings of the Rosy Cross, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and Alist Crowley's Stellar, I want to dive deeper into some of the specific practices and start bringing all of these things together. Going all the way back to the start of the video where I talked about the chivalric romances and the wandering knights, I want to talk about another important topic, and that is the quest for the Holy Grail. This object usually takes the form of a sacred chalice that is capable of miraculous healing or even granting immortality and eternal youth. It's a really important motif for the genre, and later they even sometimes overlapped it with the idea of the holy chalice used by Jesus to share his blood at the Last Supper. Sometimes the Grail was instead a stone known as the Philosopher's Stone. Alchemy was important to these stories and religions of the time, so naturally real-life alchemists also wanted to find the legendary Philosopher's Stone. That's why, for example, you'll see mentions of it in the media about magic, especially when the authors show actual interest in alchemy, like Harry Potter. It's why one of the founding texts of the Rosy Cross Order, the Chemical Wedding, is all secretly an encoded description of how to create the elusive Philosopher's Stone. Alchemists would undergo processes to discover the Philosopher's Stone, known as the magnum opus or great work, of which many variations of this process are referenced by Hoyoverse. For example, the entirety of Albedo's lore revolves around this, since Albedo is the second phase when attempting to purify chemicals in an effort to create the Philosopher's Stone. You can see alchemy in the ever-popular Rider-Waite tarot deck, which, by the way, was actually designed by a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and intentionally depicts Hermetic principles. For more information on these cards, you can read the designer's book, The Pictorial Key to the Tarot. Actually, while we're here, take a close look at the Magician card. Now, look at this. Am I crazy for this take, or do you see it too? Okay, take special note of the roses on the ground and decorating the borders. Look at the colours of his outfit, his downwards pointing finger, and the yellow of the background. Keep in mind that for Hermetic alchemists, the roses are supposed to represent perfect alchemy and the tree of life. The roses are Tiferet, the beauty, the equalizer of all the forces, and that which combines multiple components to make something better. In this case, the alchemist in the picture is trying to combine the four objects on the table, which represent the four elements, to create the Philosopher's Stone. One hand is raised and the other lowered to represent the Hermetic principle of as above, so below, and his belt is the infinite Ouroboros, representing eternal life and the infinite God reflected in all things. Now, for many people, including Alist Crowley, the pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone is usually not a physical one, but rather a spiritual one. For the Christian-themed alchemists, it was the return to the Garden of Eden, or heaven, and the liberation of the soul, but for Crowley it was the process of pursuing the true will and a connection with the universe, especially the God as knew it, that is the infinite stars and space. Crowley believed that every soul strived to return to their true status as a star of the heavens, perfecting the soul, conquering the abyss and confronting the demon within it, and reuniting with the divine beyond it was central to Thelema, inspired from pre-existing Kabbalistic and Gnostic ideologies. The demon confronts the alchemist with a series of trials involving illusions and delusions that the alchemist must confront, and victory requires the annihilation of the ego. This idea is also the basis of the Gnostic Leviathan, that is the final test when ascending from the false earth to the realm of the eons. In my opinion, this strongly reminds me of Argenti's character stories, where you find out that the Knights of Beauties are subjected to illusory challenges at the hands of the triple demons, and when Argenti wins, the voice announces, "With each triumph, you must confront yourselves anew, peering into the depths of your hearts and acknowledging the potential for malevolence. Congratulations, once again you have triumphed in the trial of reflection." I think it's important to recognize that fundamentally the idea of the Philosopher's Stone is, for all intents and purposes, something that is supposed to be able to transmute one thing into something else. And this is where things finally start to come together. Chapter 6. Beauty is the Beast. The concept of beauty in juxtaposition to the beast runs all throughout this narrative. You've got the movie called Beauty and the Beast, where, just like Argenti's old mentor, the beautiful prince was cursed to be hideous to reflect his inner personality. Before that, you have Snow White's evil queen, who, despite being the second most beautiful person in the lands, chose violence in jealousy, a process that involved her literal transformation into an ugly old witch. Again, in Sleeping Beauty, you have the princess and the dragon, but the dragon also has a human form that they're in much of the time. But fairy tales aren't the only connection between Beauty and the Beast. Crowley's own Thelema was very focused on this idea. He considered himself to be the Beast 666, the Antichrist, and naturally his lover was an incarnation of Babylon, based on the whore of Babylon who rides atop the Beast. For Crowley, Babylon and the Beast are waiting beyond the abyss within Bina and Chokmah. She holds a chalice, of which the magician must give themselves up to her and empty their own blood within the chalice, reminiscent of Jesus' blood within the Holy Grail, and in that act they are reborn as a master of magic, and their venture across the abyss is complete. Don't forget the Holy Grail is an equivalent of the Philosopher's Stone. Okay, this next bit is a bit weird and speculative, but regarding Babylon and the Beast, take a good look at the Ouroboros. Now, look a bit closer at the rider. A bit closer. Okay, see her hair? She looks exactly like a Gorgon from Greek mythology. To my knowledge, there's only one other place that we see this Gorgon-like hair, and it is within the simulated universe occurrence titled Loneliness, Cosmic Beauty Bugs. Do note that the Chinese word for bugs here also applies to worms, and so we have this encounter with the sweet saliva worm. It should be a similar worm to those that show up often in the Swarm Disaster story. But look closely at the pink woman and you'll see her hair is also made of worms, just as the woman atop the Ouroboros. Now, am I saying that the missing Idrila actually became part of the similarly missing Ouroboros and rides the Veracity around doing who knows what as a stand-in for Babylon and the Beast? No. I mean, probably not. Technically it could be possible, I guess, but I don't think so. Although, in saying that the Ouroboros is based on the Gnostic Leviathan as the final test of the Abyss, but no. Instead, what I'm suggesting is simply a racial link between the Beauty and Ouroboros. Now, consider the fact that the Ouroboros is one of the ancient Dusk Leviathan, so too should be Long, as they're literally depicted as an Ouroboros. Honkai Impact 3 already taught us that Hoyoverse equates all the Serpentine deities with each other too. Consider that the main thing we know about Long is that they gave their scions the ability to transmute themselves into dragons and alter the forms of other life forms also. This is the Transmutation Arcanum, and it's inherited by the High Elders. For the Freemason alchemists, they believed that the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, the literal stone of transmutation, went back to Adam in the Garden of Eden, who inherited the knowledge of the stone directly from God, and this knowledge was passed down to successive biblical patriarchs, resulting in their long lives. I think it's also telling that most of the time in fairy tales, the beast that holds the princess hostage is, in fact, a dragon. Now, this is even more uber-theoretical, and this is your warning to not take this next bit too seriously, but you know how Kafka claimed the path of propagation actually split the path of permanence? What I'm going to say now, I will acknowledge sounds utterly crazy, but we've known for ages that the Swarm Disaster consisted of literal people that were being transformed into bugs and were flying off into space. You may also remember the figure Melchizedek, who, along with Melchias, is actually a reference to Melchizedek, an important biblical figure who is actually asserted to be an incarnation of Jesus Christ, who is also an eon by the Gnostics. The Rosicrucians believed Melchizedek to be the king and priest of the perfect hermaphrodite humans before they were split, and part of the Philosopher's Stone is to become a species that has transcended beyond biological sex. Also consider that Hermaphroditus is the son of Hermes, as in Hermes Trismegistus, and Aphrodite, who was also often depicted with male sex organs in the Homer of Aphrodite, and the emphasis of this particular trait makes perfect sense. In Honkai Star Rail, Melchizedek's own child turns into one of the swarm bugs and disappears, so she ends up adopting dozens of the bugs and caring for them until they're all called away into the sky. When the children leave and don't return, she throws herself into the sky too. Personally, I believe it's pretty strongly implied that she became the core of Tazeronth, especially with the way she longed for children, but it's up for interpretation. If you want to learn the story of the Swarm Disaster, I do have a whole series dedicated to it. So, when you combine the fact that the bugs are actually transmuted entities, and that there's also the Loneliness Cosmic Beauty bugs, where loneliness is of course the thing that Tazeronth is most known for, as well as the fact that the path of propagation split the path of the permanence somehow, it strongly feels like the Beauty as a source of elevated transmutation played a large role somewhere in this story. Perhaps the wormy bug is derived from the Leviathans, and this is the beast to Idrila's beauty. Perhaps these bug people were initially bugs that, through the power of transmutation of Tiferet, were initially transformed into humans, and maybe it was the shattering of the path of beauty that resulted in these transformed people turning back into their beastly selves. Just as the Omen of Evil predicts the Night of Beauty's inevitable failing of the trial of reflection and subsequent transformation into a monster that must be slain by another Night of Beauty. Maybe when these potentially Leviathan-based life forms, possibly even a branch of Long Scions, started to transform back into worms and Melchizedek took to the skies herself, it was enough to split the path of Long and take all of the propagation away from the path, as well as altering the effects of Long Scion's transmutation powers in the process. I also feel compelled to mention that not only is Lorcha vaguely Christian-themed, inherited from Otto Apocalypse, but also the contents of his coffin were recently confirmed to be part of Tazeronth, and we've all seen how the contents of his coffin include thorns very similar to the powers demonstrated by Argenti. Though we haven't seen any roses from Lorcha's coffin, he did fold this paper into a rose, and his own flower does have some resemblance to the lily also featured on the Magician card, as well as on the original card back. There's also the strangely suspicious excerpt from Argenti's story that talks about the beauty. It was a world bathed in amber, draped in undisturbed stillness, where every being shed tears for the magnificent wonders veiled beneath its surface. I can't help but be reminded that the shards of Tazeronth were supposed to be encompassed in pieces of amber, so this talk of beauty beneath the surface of a world bathed in amber is extremely eyebrow-raising in my opinion. I also find it interesting that both Idrila and Tazeronth are described as being broken up into shards.
I wonder if the dying words of those ugly menaces can be trusted. As the saying goes, even an insect speaks kind words when death is near.
Are you implying that the insect imparted you with a message prior to its demise?
Correct. Its final words were, "Celebrate this superficial victory, for you will never be able to acknowledge the existence of the Overlord."
Let's ignore the fact that you understand insect speak for now.
I also want to mention one more thing. You remember how I spoke a lot about sleeping princesses? Well, there's another one in The Chemical Wedding when Christian Rosy Cross goes into the sepulchre of Venus and sees a corpse. Beside her is a tablet that reads, "When the fruit of my tree shall be quite melted down, then I shall awake and be the mother of a king." Given Honkai's emphasis on trees and the recurring theme of sleeping women, my prediction is that Idrila's sleeping corpse will be found buried beneath a majestic tree that was probably put there as a prison to contain them. First, we may even have to defeat their beastly version in combat and then transmute them back into the beauty. And at this point, I think if anyone can be blamed for disappearing the beauty, I'm definitely pointing fingers at the equilibrium and the finality. So, what do you think of all this? I spent literal weeks working on this video, so I would really appreciate it if you left a like if you enjoyed it, as well as your thoughts in the comments. I also really appreciate every Ko-fi donation to help fund all the time I spend on these videos. So, did you know much about Hermeticism and Rosicrucianism before watching? By the way, there's a lot more to these topics that would be impossible to cover, so I'll leave some resources in the description for your own perusal. Otherwise, I did start streaming Honkai Star Rail related stuff every Wednesday, so if that sounds fun to you, then please check out my Twitch channel. That's all from me. Catch us next time. Bye!